The evening shadows stretched softly across the polished hardwood floors of Betty Jones's new apartment, where half-opened cardboard boxes and rolls of bubble wrap stood like cheerful monuments to a fresh beginning. The warm glow of a ceramic table lamp cut through the twilight, casting a cozy ambience over the living room. Betty stood back, wiping a speck of dust from her hands, admiring the placement of the lamp on the corner side table. Barnaby Jones, leaning comfortably against the doorway with his hands in his pockets, smiled with gentle approval. Jedediah, surrounded by stacks of wrapped china, stretched his arms and let out a dramatic sigh of mock exhaustion. "What do you think, Barnaby?" Betty asked, tilting her head to gauge the aesthetic balance of the room. "I like any kind of lamp that holds a bulb of 150 watts, Barnaby replied with a soft chuckle, his eyes twinkling with fond amusement. "Come on, Jedediah, you tell me," Betty said, turning toward her cousin. "Look, will you trust me?" Jedediah smiled, brushing off a stray piece of packing tape. "It is a terrific lamp, and it looks great right there." "You really like it that much?" "I ought to," Jedediah teased with a grin. "I gave it to you for Christmas." Betty laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, come on. Here I was, taking your interior design advice seriously." At this hour of the night, Barnaby said gently, "The only thing to take seriously is a fond farewell." "Come on, Jedediah. We have a heavy day ahead of us tomorrow." "Oh, that is just swell," Betty remarked with playful sarcasm, gesturing toward the kitchen counter. "Right when I am finally getting down to unwrapping all your dishes." "Sorry, kid," Jedediah replied with an exaggerated shrug of innocent mischief. "Dishes are women's work." "I always knew you were a shameless chauvinist," Betty countered, her tone bright and affectionate as she tossed a soft piece of wrapping paper at him. Her gaze then drifted toward the small entryway table, where a brightly wrapped package had caught her eye. It sat quietly beside the mail stack, tied with an elegant ribbon. "Well, will you look at this?" Jedediah remarked, stepping closer to inspect the parcel. "With all these housewarming presents you keep getting, you could move every couple of months and make out like a bandit." "Right," Betty murmured, a subtle furrow appearing on her brow. "Although I really have not told that many people that I was moving yet." "Well, you must have told somebody," Barnaby observed in his calm, measured tone. "Let us see what they got you." Betty carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay an ornate, heart-shaped box of chocolates accompanied by a small card with pasted letters. "A Valentine," Betty murmured, her brow furrowing slightly. "And it is not even Valentine's Day." Barnaby's protective instincts flared immediately. "Check the corridor," he instructed Jedediah in a steady, hushed tone. Jedediah moved swiftly to the hallway, scanning both directions of the quiet building before returning. "Street is clear, too. Nothing out of the ordinary." "Oh, Barnaby," Betty said, offering a reassuring smile despite the chill that brushed the room. "I know what you are thinking, those awful headlines in the news, but good heavens, there are dozens of department stores that carry heart-shaped boxes all year round." "I would feel a lot better if we knew who sent it," Barnaby replied thoughtfully. "We are going to feel very foolish when we find out this is just a sweet gesture from an old friend," Betty insisted softly, glancing down at the card. The neat, pasted letters formed a short verse. "How much do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I will very soon. You're next." Down at the police precinct the following morning, Lieutenant John Biddle reviewed the lab reports alongside Barnaby. The atmosphere in the office was thick with the scent of black coffee and fresh paperwork. "The lab specialists are double-checking the candy box and the note right now," Lieutenant Biddle explained, adjusting his glasses. "Just what does it take, John, to tell whether it came from the Valentine killer or not?" Barnaby asked, his voice steady but deeply focused. "Barnaby, I am just as worried about Betty as you are," Biddle replied earnestly. "But there is simply no way to be completely sure that this pasted-up note is identical to the ones the killer sent his previous victims." "What about the candy?" "Sold by the carload in every drug and dime store in the entire country," Biddle sighed, tapping the dossier on his desk. "These telephone conversations," Barnaby noted, flipping through the thin pages. "I do not find anywhere in this file that you managed to tape any of them." "No," Biddle admitted with regret. We got into the investigation too late each time. The first two victims, Doreen Lockwood and Elsie Barton, thought it was merely an awkward secret admirer who had an innocent crush on them from afar. The third woman, Linda Kelly, did not approach us until the perpetrator began mailing photographs of her daily routine. According to the reports, that is generally just before he strikes, Barnaby observed. That is the exact pattern, Biddle agreed. First, a seemingly harmless romantic gift. Then, unsettling telephone calls and more gifts. And finally, when he grows tired of the cat-and-mouse game, he sends photographs taken from hidden vantage points. Shortly after that, he strikes, leaving no physical clues. No fingerprints? None. He even develops his own photographs in a private darkroom. Not a single reliable lead. Sergeant Gyan entered the office carrying a manila folder, his expression serious. Lieutenant? Excuse me, sir. This just came in from the Devonshire Division. Hello, Will, Barnaby said warmly. Will turned, his demeanor softening. Hello, Mr. Jones. I just heard about Betty. Is she doing all right? She is holding up well, Barnaby replied. What is this report, Sergeant? Biddle asked, taking the folder. Devonshire Division uncovered a woman's body in a shallow grave earlier this morning, Will reported. It appears she has been deceased for about 1 week. Strangled? Barnaby asked quietly. No, Will answered, shaking his head. It is definitely not the Valentine killer. The victim was stabbed multiple times. We are currently processing her fingerprints to establish a positive identification. Stay on top of it, Biddle instructed. Bring me the coroner's official findings the moment they arrive. Yes, sir. Will nodded respectfully before turning to Barnaby. It was very good to see you, Mr. Jones. Barnaby offered a supportive nod. When Will exited, Biddle turned back to Barnaby. Well, Barnaby, why do you not head back to the office or go home and get some rest? You know, John, there is one critical detail about all this that does not seem to fit the profile. What is that? The timing, Barnaby explained, leaning forward. In every documented case, the killer waited 3 or 4 weeks before reaching out to his next target. In Betty's case, he reached out only 24 hours after the incident with Linda Kelly. Could be he is growing overconfident, Biddle suggested. Could be, Barnaby mused, though his instincts told him there was another layer to the puzzle. Back at the private investigation office, sunlight poured through the blinds, casting bright diagonal stripes across the desks. Betty was already seated at her typewriter, fingers dancing briskly over the keys. Barnaby walked in, raising an eyebrow. I thought we had an understanding that you were going to stay home and relax today. That was last night, Betty replied with a bright, defiant smile. You know how the old saying goes about a woman's prerogative to change her mind. Besides, letting myself get frightened into hiding by some mysterious individual is not an option. If I sit home trembling behind closed curtains, I have already surrendered my peace of mind. Is that your opinion too, Jedediah? Jedediah raised both hands in mock surrender.
Do not look at me.
Everyone knows Betty has an iron will. Barnaby, it is genuinely better for me to stay here and keep productive instead of sitting alone in an empty apartment worrying, Betty added sincerely. All right, Barnaby conceded with a warm, approving smile. Jedediah, would you fetch that duplicate case file Lieutenant Biddle provided? As Jedediah stepped toward the hallway, he noticed a shadow lingering near the frosted glass of the entrance. Barnaby, there is someone standing right outside the door. Jedediah pulled the door open swiftly. All right, friend, what are you doing lurking out here? It is all right, Jedediah, Barnaby said calmly.
Come on in, Will.
Sergeant Gyan stepped inside, looking slightly sheepish as he adjusted his jacket. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Hello, Betty. Will, what a pleasant surprise, Betty said, standing up from her desk. Will Gyan, LAPD, Jedediah said, crossing his arms with a dry grin. I do not care if you play for the Professional Football League. You should not be hovering in the corridor like a second-story prowler. Will chuckled softly. I apologize. We are all understandably on edge. I should have knocked immediately. It has been far too long, Betty. Give or take a year or so. Betty agreed warmly. What brings you by our office, Will? Official assignment, Will explained proudly. I am officially assigned as one of your security details. Lieutenant Biddle received direct instructions from the division commander. The department has no intention of letting anything happen to you. That is very considerate, Betty said, though her practical nature shone through. But I already have Barnaby and Jedediah keeping an eye on things. No offense, Will, but having an entire brigade of bodyguards following my every step seems a bit excessive. Orders are orders, Will said with a broad smile. But I promise to stay entirely out of your way. Well, since you are here, Barnaby suggested, perhaps you can lend a hand. We need to comb through every detail in these records to find the common thread linking the victims. Before you dive into the paperwork, Will offered, why not have Betty speak directly with Ellen Ashley? She was the roommate of Doreen Lockwood. Her official statement